A disturbing story coming out of about an employee that wrote a memo and said this diversity stuff is killing us. If you read that story, you most likely think, well, let me ask, Jeffy, did you read that story?
I saw the headline. It's only just like one guy, right?
Right, what?
It's just one guy, right?
One guy, what do you mean by that? So it's just not a problem because it's only one guy.
Just one guy writing a letter.
It's actually very true, and that's the way most people are reading the story. They're just doing what Jeffy did and reads the headlines. It's a 10-page memo. I wish it weren't just one guy. When you hear the case he's making, I'm going to try to summarize it for you and show you what Zulu's response is and why this should wake people up. We begin there right now. America, I want you to know that common sense has left the building. It was escorted out by HR, and actually it's not HR. It was the director of diversity, integrity, and governance that took common sense and escorted it to the door. It has been in the process of leaving America for a very long time, but it just cleared out its desk. All of its pictures are gone. If you walk by Common Sense desk today, you might notice no one is sitting in that desk anymore, around that desk. Put all of its stuff in a box. And it was really surprised at the clutter. Lots of things that, weren't on its desk when it first started working here. Stuff like what marriage is, babies' right to live, gender differences, religious freedom, capitalism, socialism, the basic First Amendment rights. Those things have been taken off the desk of common sense for a long time. As a society, we have now reached a place that is dangerous and absurd. But there are people who are standing up. There is common sense left in many corners of the country, but not in some of our biggest institutions, not in some of our most powerful companies. And that's why I need to start the program today with the memo drama. It actually matters. I'm going to summarize it. It's a 10-page memo, and I'm going to try to just summarize the highlights, but everyone should read this, and everyone should ponder deeply, because remember, home is in your home. All of the AI is coming your way. So is redesigning our culture. And here's what happened. Late last week, a male senior software engineer, we don't know his name, he wrote a lengthy memo that he shared with colleagues, and it was titled Ideological Echo Chamber. In it, he basically criticized the company's diversity policies that he says actually result in reverse discrimination and suppress conservative political views. Now, this kind of progressive insanity has become the default norm in many of these places, but his memo is thoughtful, it is well written, it's 10 pages long, so let me give you some of the highlights. He starts out in the memo by saying, people generally have good intentions, but we all have biases that are invisible to us. Agree so far. Only an open and honest discussion with those who disagree will highlight our blind spots and help us grow, which is why I felt the need to write this document. Who has several biases, and only honest discussion about these biases will help, and yet it's being silenced by the dominant ideology. Left bias has created a politically correct monoculture that maintains its hold by shaming dissenters into silence. This silence removes any checks against encroaching extremist and authoritarian policies. Later in the memo, this guy actually has the audacity to point out that, brace yourself, men and women are biologically different, and that men and women also have personality differences. I know, like men are from Mars and women are from Mars too. I think that was the name of the book. When common sense leaves the building, you have to find yourself getting back to the basics of the birds and bees or Mars and Venus. He says we have to stop assuming that gender gaps imply sexism. Let me say that again. We need to stop assuming that gender gaps imply sexism. Now, what does that mean? Well, he points out some, quote, non-discriminatory ways to reduce the gender gap, which is a section that many of his critics apparently missed, like, unfortunately, quoting, as long as tech and leadership remains high status and lucrative careers, men may disproportionately want to be in them. Allowing and truly endorsing as part of our culture, part-time work, though, can keep more women in tech. What he does is he makes a really good case. Men want the status. Men are much more likely to be allured by the status and the high lucrative jobs. Women, for the most part, are not attracted to those things. They're more attracted to changing the world for the better. They're more attracted to family, to flexible work hours, etc., etc. They're just different. He lists some of the harms of biases like, quote, programs, mentoring, and classes only for people with a certain gender or race, and a high priority queue and special treatment for diversity candidates. Did you know that you could go to this wonderfully equal place, and if you are a white male, you can't take some of the mentoring or some of the classes for jobs because you're a white male? He goes on, in highly progressive environments, conservatives are a minority that feel like they need to stay in the closet to avoid open hostility. We should empower those with different ideologies to be able to express themselves. I can't believe we're actually, for the people who say that they are for fairness, they're for diversity, that they have been shoved in a closet forever, I can't believe we have to tell them, don't shove other people into the closet that you hated. Microaggression training incorrectly and dangerously equates speech with violence. None of this is backed up by evidence. Quote, once we acknowledge that not all differences are socially constructed or due to discrimination, we open our eyes to a more accurate view of the human condition, which is necessary if we actually want to solve problems. Let me tell you something. This guy standing up, even though he didn't put his name on it, and writing this, you don't think Google can find out who's writing what on their computer? This took guts. A conservative hero, right? No. He describes himself the way I like to describe myself, but nobody understands it, and so I don't say it very often. A classic liberal. A classic liberal is what our founders were. Now, if you read this 10-page memo, it is inspiring. It is finally somebody saying, with evidence to back it up, this is killing us, guys. This is going to lead us to authoritarianism. So what is Google's reaction to this classic liberal? One of their own who dared speak his mind in this very diverse culture of... He says, quote, despite what the public response seems to have been, I've gotten many personal messages from fellow Googlers expressing their gratitude for bringing up these important issues, which they agree, but would never have the courage to say or defend because of the shaming culture at Google and the possibility of being fired. This needs to change, end quote. So, after reading the memo, one livid female coworker tweeted, I'm still shaking in anger. If HR does not do something about this case, I will consider leaving this company for real for the first time in 5 years. Any resistance to ideas like this protectionist diversity stuff at Google is read clearly as nothing more than hate speech and worthy of firing. How do we stop this huge leap in flawed logic? Sunday evening, finally released an official response to the viral memo. Danielle Brown, she is their new VP of Diversity, Integrity, and Governance. Oh my gosh, does that sound spooky? She wrote, many of you have read an internal document shared by someone in our engineering organization expressing views on natural abilities and characteristics of different genders, as well as whether one can speak freely of these things. And like many of you, I found that it advanced incorrect assumptions about gender. I'm not going to link it here, as I'm not going to have a viewpoint, this viewpoint, one that I or this company would be perceived as endorsing, promoting, or encouraging. So the head of diversity says what this guy's point of view is, which has no hate in it at all. It's so shameful, I won't even print it here. Let me just translate. This company does not allow any reasoned argument that questions our vacuum-sealed progressive agenda, so shut the hell up and get in line. She continues, quote, part of building an open and inclusive environment means fostering a culture in which those with alternative views, including different political views, feel safe in sharing their opinions. But that discord needs to work alongside the principles of equal employment found in our code of conduct, policies, and anti-discrimination laws. So you can have a different opinion, if I may translate. If your alternative view includes something like conservative or classic liberal politics, or believing that men and women are indeed different, you're totally cool to do that. Just perhaps you'll feel safer outside of a 200-mile radius of our campus. People should thank this guy. People should promote this guy. People should have a civil conversation, not one where they're shouting each other down, but a civil conversation about this. This is the kind of dialogue a common sense company would want, especially one that is going into AI where they're going to take and teach machines the difference between right and wrong. You would think a respectful, intelligent, well-thought-out memo wouldn't be hard to defend or hard to write. It will be a miracle if this Google guy survives the week without being fired. You watch. This diversity governance culture is a way for overcompensating for the mistakes of America's past. How long will this country flog itself for its past sins? Where is the grace to say, I'm sorry, and move on? And now that we've overcompensated to the point that a memo asserting that men and women are made differently and might perform differently or want different things in the work environment is considered radical. Google needs to hear one thing. Diversity is not a virtue. Diversity is not a principle, although progressives are hell-bent in trying to make it one. Saying diversity is not a virtue or a principle. It's not racist or sexist or homophobic. We need more brave people like this guy at Google on both sides of the argument to stand up for common sense, because that battle is only going to intensify. But we also need to be able to sit down and reason together, left and right, while we still can, while there's still enough freedom of speech left in the tank. Why don't we sit down and, instead of calling people names, listen to each other and talk to each other? Because I have a feeling, as I have found in the last year or so, we both might be surprised at what the other side has to say.